Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, I have my very favorite Ruby archaeologist, Nick Schwaderer, on the show. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey folks, my name is Nick Schwaderer. You might know me as some version of Schwad on Twitter or GitHub. I work at Shopify. In fact, I just hit my 1 year marker yesterday, or at time of recording. And yeah, I love diving into Ruby archaeology. It's not what Shopify wants me to do, right? Like I actually do real work in real life. But yeah, I love digging into Ruby history and Ruby archaeology in my own time.
That's awesome. And I very much enjoyed your talk at RubyConf. And if any listeners out there have not listened to that talk, you absolutely should pause the podcast episode right now and go do that. But Nick, this is your first time on the show, so just a synopsis of how we do this. It kind of acts a little like a stand-up. I'm going to ask you what you're working on. That could be work stuff, if you're allowed to disclose it. It could be personal stuff, just, projects that you're working on or things that you're doing for Sin City Ruby that I know you're talking at. And then we're going to go into blockers, and that could be a current blocker that you have or a blocker that you recently had and how you overcame it. And then as the last question to kind of just wrap up, if there's anything really cool, neat that you're working on or that you recently learned or stumbled upon, feel free to share it. So we'll get started with the first question. What are you working on?
Yeah, I could think of two things that I'm currently putting together. One has been kind of off and on, and one is a bit more like I'd love to really dig into it a bit more. But I'll start with the first thing. So make sure I don't forget the second thing, which I won't. Yeah, for SimCity Ruby, I feel like I don't really tweet about it because I want to keep as much in the tank as I can for when I do my talk. But I feel like if somebody cares enough to listen to a podcast with my name on it, I can spill the beans a little more, right?
Yeah.
About
All
what I'm
right.
slugging through. So yeah, so like at the moment, unless there's a radical change between now and March, I would like to focus my talk on a particular Ruby gem that I'm trying to get up and alive. It was a Ruby. I won't say the name. I'll at least keep that secret. But it was published by Why the Lucky Stiff in 2004. It was actually released before Ruby gems existed, and a lot was built on it. I'll say roughly, it helped with things like building your own weblogs with comments, certain types of markdown, lots of command line executables that came with it that you could run to generate things. Very different way of writing code than we're used to with all our linters and Rubocop and everything today. And yeah, so what I want to talk about this if I can get it to properly work. But the magical thing that I'll be unveiling, there'll be at the talk, that'll be the surprise that I'm spoiling right now, is that I have taken it over and published it to Ruby Gems. So I've done that. So the last commit Y wrote, and if you really want to look, you can probably look me up on Ruby Gems and find it, right? But it would say like author, Why the Lucky Steph, publisher Schwad, which is, or owner Schwad, right? So it's something that you couldn't gem install until I saved it, which is quite cool. You could find it on GitHub, but it's not like, it's so weird. Like all the things that Y worked on, this doesn't have a lot of discussion anymore, but it has so many facets because he really thought about, like, if you think of Apricot, which I talked about in my talk, he really thinks about the user experience of the kind of API or whatever he builds for you to use, right? Like he thinks about how would a coder like to write up using my tool. And with this, similarly, there's like support for plugins, and there's a list of plugins that people wrote to integrate with this gem. And you wouldn't have even called it like, you didn't even think about it as a gem at the time, because the way that people shared Ruby was just like packages of Ruby, and you'd open it, right? You'd open your terminal and you'd run the open command. It wasn't even URI open then. You just write open and you'd put in their website and pull down their code as text and eval it, right? Like that's like how people were sharing Ruby. But anyway, so yeah, so like the smaller thing that I'm working on right now is just like, how do I want to approach working with this gem where it's not just a bundle install, because no bundler, right? And you have setup RB, which I've seen in old Ruby projects, but there's also like these weird installation files like make go RB, install RB, all these things. So I'm slugging through that. like these ancient ways of putting Ruby together, plus Y doing whatever the hell he wanted, because he didn't. The way this gem was put together was not to be used by others, right? Like he used it
Right.
for himself on this website, and then you could use this thing that I'm not saying the name of it. You could bring that in your machine and use all his tooling, but you never developed on core. Like even if you, the main README, if you go onto it, it's like, how'd you get here? You're not meant to be here. But yeah, when you install it, there's all this ASCII that comes down with like an elephant and just really wild stuff that I feel is so undiscovered. So the goal here is to, well, I've spilled the beans on like it helps like with blog generation. It was used for Y's own sites. I think it's also used for his code hosting. But to get this to where I can run it in some format today, and then that may involve some commits, but like a clear, like, hey, this is a commit trying to keep it as Y-esque as possible, but this is so it runs. I'm not changing the core, like how you do it or improving it. I may not even write tests, right? Like I just keep it as like blah. And what I'd love to do for Sin City Ruby is, I don't know if you've ever watched any of like Y's talks or art or presentations, but it was like there were commercial breaks, there was weird flash videos and songs, and I'm just like, okay, if I can do the first 15 minutes of the talk as like an infomercial for this tool and not talk about why at all, just like present the thing and like go through everything you can do, and maybe have a few whimsical like song segments or even like cartoon slides that are just odd, and talking about it in the way that the tone Y kind of used in his writings, which were like sometimes odd and abstract. Like he went on a random rant about koalas during one of his RailsConf talk about, and it doesn't make sense. He wasn't talking about koalas in a way that made sense. Like that's, so I was thinking if I do the first half like that, and then I kind of like change character, step out in across the fourth wall, and then maybe the second half of the talk, then I just do, all right, here's Nick again. Here is what this is. Here's what it meant to the community. Here's what was built on top of it. Here's all the plugins, and here's how it worked. Here's how I got to work today, and here's why you ought to use it. And I'll probably try and like even transition some of my own work, maybe even a blog of mine onto this tool. So yeah, like it's one of those things where I'm fortunate to have an employer who is a bit more supportive of the community side, because I've never worked anywhere that would let you explicitly do this during office time. So like on a Friday, I actually have a few hours that I've booked in that I'm just going to open this gem and goof around on it, and like my teammates will know it and I won't get in trouble. Whereas for my last talk, I didn't know this. I did everything nights and weekends. Right. Which I'm not going to lie, when you're doing like a RubyConf talk, you start getting stressed out, because I'm like trying to perform at full-time Shopify level, which isn't stressful, but it's, it is a job. And then do my best Ruby work on the side, like digging and investigation. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. But it's going to come up fast, dude. March.
Yeah.
I hope I'm allowed to shill out. Get your tickets. I think this is a massive opportunity. I'm going to throw my history card down again. And I don't pretend to be an expert. I've just spent a lot of time reading this stuff. And dude, 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Ruby, there was so many conferences. Like there was Chicago, like Windy City, PDX, so Portland, Seattle RB, you had conferences everywhere. Like we've had our friends put some on, of course, more recently, like Southeast Ruby and whatnot. But there were, right now I think of RubyConf, RailsConf, Ruby Kaigi, and then Brighton Ruby and Yuruko are like 5 of the main ones I think of. There's a few other ones, but this is like a new one. This is a new one that somebody's trying to start. And you think of all the RubyConfs listeners, I'm talking to listeners, that you've heard of over your time, or if you've ever seen a great conference video and it's like from a conference you've never been to because it doesn't exist anymore, there's loads of those. And I think that we really need to make an effort, and especially if you can get support from your employer to send you, because I used to have to fund my own way. And in most conferences, I funded my own way. But if you can get a support from work, and it is continuing education, just because it feels fun, it is genuine continuing education for your craft. I'd say this is a big conference to support, because we need, in my opinion, a few conferences kicking around Europe, North America, Asia that aren't RubyConf, RailsConf, RubyKaigi, that are of a different flair and can develop their own personality. I think Jason's even said that this one's a bit that you're allowed to go on like Keep Ruby Weird vibe. And I went to a one-off conference that was quite big in the UK, but it was smaller. It wasn't hundreds of people, hundreds and hundreds of people, but it was a global Ruby conference. And it's such a treat to meet with a group of people in that size and really get to know them. You get to really talk to the speakers, whereas it's easy at a bigger conference to see the person you know on the stage, and you're not going to come up and talk to them, even though they'd love you. Like, obviously anyone talks to me, but some people could go a whole conference without talking to anyone. So yeah, please go, people. I will give you my best content possible if you go.
Yeah, I second all of that. I'm very excited for this. And I did have an opportunity to talk to Jason. I was on his podcast not too long ago, and we had a little chat about it. And he was definitely like, I want to keep it weird and make sure we're touching on like weird stuff. So that's kind of the direction I'm taking my talk, where it's like, here's some weird stuff you can do with Ruby. Maybe you haven't seen it before. You probably haven't, because you probably shouldn't do any of this, but you know, you can. So, but it's funny because you were talking about 2004, and that's probably when I was touching my first programming language, and that's Ruby 1.8 in 2004. So that's crazy, but super cool.
Yeah, you're definitely saying a lot of the things I talked about in my talk. You're saying the colon for calling a method as opposed to a dot sometimes, which, by the way, Mike D'Alessio came up to me after the talk because I mentioned it in his code, and he's explaining conventions around using it. Like, I think he uses it in like singleton methods or something. It's really cool. But yeah, why? I mean, it's all tabs. It's all like, I'd love to write a Rubocop YAML that passes that directory, right? So, and you could call it Y style, but like, it'd be like, this is going to fail all the Rubocop rules, because people don't realize Rubocop exists because there are different ways to do shit. And so that's why Rubocop exists. In fact, you should look in Rubocop like I do and find out what you should try that's different, because it'll tell you, no, don't use and, use ampersand, ampersand. Like, oh, sweet, I can use and, right? Like it's almost documents alternative routes for choose your own adventure. And so his would fail loads of stuff because he knew everything Ruby could do. He's a very good programmer, and he did whatever he wanted to articulate it. So yeah, I think a y.yaml that like ignores and enforces rules in such a way that you can find what his style was and maybe apply it on your own repo, right?
That'd be pretty wild. And I don't necessarily think it'd be that tough to do. Like at work, we have some really old Ruby files, like 13 years old, written in Ruby 1.8. And they still run. Like, we're working on upgrading to 2.5 right now, but these files still run this many versions later without being touched. And I think that's really cool that Ruby's language is so stable that you can do these upgrades with minimal code changes to your application.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I'm going to say, like, in my mind, I think you could start, people think about technology advancing. Doesn't matter how tech advances, you can nearly say Ruby's feature complete for a language to give you what you want. In fact, it probably has way more than you even need or want. And to your point, it's probably had it for a heck of a long time. So yeah, like another one, sorry to keep harping on why, but I've just spent most time looking at stuff. He wrote Bloopsophone in like Ruby 1.8 or 1.9, which allows you before, I don't know if you know Sonic Pi, where you can write Ruby to like make music. Way before that, this was a way to make music in Ruby. And so you just like, he wrote his entire, like, again, for the coder to write music in a certain style that he came up with that turned it into tunes, and people wrote entire songs in it. And yeah, if you go in Ruby 3.0 and probably 3.1 today and gem install it, it works. And it hasn't had a single commit since Ruby 1.8. It just works because it doesn't have like the spec doesn't restrict you. So the code just works. So depending on what you do, and obviously the more dependencies, it gets harder. But like for the way you compose Ruby and what you want it to do, the backwards compatibility, nobody's going to like change how you do like a module or a class or a method. They might give you some more stuff. I mean, we had some keyword positional stuff change with the recent Ruby, but and even like when they changed the syntax for hash rockets in 1.9, they didn't ban them. but you can still write it. And so, yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that Ruby, as it has been, still just works. You just might run into a situation where like people do some weird meta programming internal stuff that's very volatile and changes. Or Rails is a lot harder, right? Because of everything that it has and depends on. But if you're just like scripting a gem, it's not that bad. And that's what I like about working with it. You know, it's if you go look at the old code, it's a lot easier to bring forward and put together. And that's why I'm really looking forward to bringing forward this cool tool and using it again today. It's so funny. Like people discard tools so quickly unless they have some great utility for them in their application, and they're very quick to say that something is stale. You know, have you ever used a gem and at first you think it's stale because it's like not had a commit in 5 years, and like there's no issues or pull requests, but then you see, oh wait, no, it's just done.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just complete. It just
Yeah.
maybe needs a version bump every 2 years.
Yeah, we run into that a lot at work because, like I said, we have an older app. So sometimes we'll run into a gem where it hasn't been updated in a long time. But that's just because, like you said, it's feature complete. It's not that it's dead. It still works fine. It still runs fine. It still does what we need it to do. And there are some cases like Apricot where, like, it's written on the repo itself, like, this is dead. Please don't use this. Move to Monokagiri. But there are plenty of other gems out there that like don't let the last commit time fool you. It's just feature complete.
Yeah. So for those who remember or still use Ruby Toolbox, it was around for a good while. And then it kind of had like I don't want to say it's dead, but like it wasn't really there for a while or having anything done to it. But then it got support and brought back to life and is rolling again probably for a few years now, right? Like I think I probably enjoyed it from like 2014 to 17. And then it kind of like, it felt longer than it was, but for a few years there wasn't much happening. But yeah, it got completely revamped, rebuilt, and has all the data and is really, really good. But there's this, I keep an eye on the repo for Ruby Toolbox. There's always this big debate, right? It's about we need to mark gems as stale, and like programmatically, like have, oh, if it's not had a contribution in this long, or like if it's been sitting for this long. And I always like go in with my very strong opinion, possibly strongly held, but maybe not loosely held, that like we should absolutely, is not the job of this tool to mark stale, because then it will like pull people away from things that might be working and done, and like definitely not do it programmatically. I think it's just one of those things you have to make an assessment. Like I pull code out of like gems that are clearly abandoned that work, and I either use the gem or I rip some code out of it myself to use, right? And I think if I can use stuff from 15 years ago and make it work, I don't know that you can use time as a hard delimiter. I mean, Bloopsophone's like creator doesn't exist in our universe, at least at the moment. Or I'll know Y is kind of been given back, so Y is an open source thing now, like in his own words. But yeah, I think that's another way to put it. But I've been thinking a lot about these kind of maintenance kind of issues, and I might actually go on to my second thing, like my actual thing I've been properly working on that I'd love to share with the listeners and kind of talk about for a little bit.
Go for it.
Yeah, so we're in this world where I can't spill all the secret sauce about like what I do in Shopify and what it is, right? Because that's just like the standard with work. But I can say that I work on internal tooling, and I can say that like we have a decent number of like internal Rails apps, because if you have a company of thousands of coders with internal tools and it's not microservices, like core is a monolith, like the app Shopify is a monolithic Rails application. That's like public knowledge, and it always will be, as far as, well, to my knowledge. Maybe they'll just change their mind tomorrow. But no, but seriously, it is. And whenever we need to build something internally, like just think about a thing you need. Oh, I want a page for people to sign up or ask questions, or, whenever you need a tool, we don't have to buy licenses. We can just have a couple of engineers spin something up. So spin up a Rails app with a front end and just, here you go, now it works, and we have it internally. And I work on some of the tooling that helps manage those services, I guess you could call them, which is super fun. Like I have made multiple Rails apps since joining, which is like, I have definitely worked at companies where most of the time it's the one app, and it's been there for years, and you got to keep it alive. And you can go years without doing greenfield. And something that I think about is in the last year, we've had a lot of awesome movement in Rails, with Rails 7, with Hotwire. And I'm not even a front end eng, but I think they're catering for everyone now, right? Whereas in the 5 and 6, it kind of felt like, right, if you have a front end engineer and you really want React, here's how you do it. But for me, it's like, no, I want to I don't mind how it used to be with like Bootstrap and jQuery, and like you copy paste the crap that you want in. You make sure you organize your views coherently. You use your view helpers, and you have a good experience. So Rails 7 is really good if you want to get that like single page app interactivity. You've got Turbo Frame Tag, Turbo Stream. I don't even reach for stimulus controllers. Our friends like Chris and Andrew and all those folks are talking about how they use their stimulus controllers and stuff. And I've never used one in production. I'm trying to get better at using them so I can understand them, so that I can do, because they say what Turbo doesn't do, you should reach for stimulus. But I've not gotten there yet. So I've done a fair bit of Turbo, just literally dropping in Turbo Frame Tag, Turbo Stream, and making things look cool. Not in production, just like on my own apps. But there's something that's missing. And what I feel is missing is like just a nice component set, like a Bootstrap. I don't want to use Bootstrap today, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I've said at work internally, like I want something that I can just copy paste, And I know we have Polaris, which is a style sheet component thing, but that's for React that Shopify maintains, which is cool, but that's React. So I was thinking, and now Tailwind's great. And I've actually bought, what are the components called? Like Tailwind UI components or something. There's something. Yeah. I've bought a lifetime license, and I have that, and that's really fun. But the thing with Tailwind, like, what if I don't want to edit anything? Like I just want to copy paste. I don't want 100 different ways to change my classes, right? To make it different. And anyway, some people, I guess I won't name names. They might be people who work at the organization who are known. And if I drop them, it would probably give more credit to what I'm saying. But since I can't confirm that they've said it. So some folks internally who I really respect their opinion were talking about, I raised this. I was like, I want to just copy paste some stuff. I'm at backend. I'm full stack. Obviously, everyone's full stack in some way. But like, let's be honest, I'm writing my Ruby, I'm writing my Rails. I don't want to design new CSS or JavaScript unnecessarily. So I just want something. I want a button, I want a nav bar, I want a card, I want a menu, I want a form. And somebody said about Shoelace, and I hadn't heard of Shoelace. I don't know if even you've heard of Shoelace, shoelace.style.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay, cool. So caveat to everyone, this is not a campaign saying Shoelace is amazing. It's just saying someone I trust said about Shoelace. So I took a look. And if you go to shoelace.style, it's web components, right? So you could just drop them in, SL-alert, SL-banner, whatever. And they do work out of the box, which is cool. So that had me pretty excited. And I was like, all right, how can I use Shoelace? And there's a couple things about how it is today that I thought were not a red flag, but a barrier to how I would like to use it. The first one is if you go into, there actually is a link for integrating with Rails.
Okay.
Which makes me think, okay, these guys care about the fact that Rails exists. It's not just React examples, but it's a bit more of the Rails 5, Rails 6, like add Webpacker, which is great because all this other stuff's new. But I'm like, no. I have a new Rails 7 application, and my goal is to start out with not needing custom JavaScript, custom CSS, Yarn, Webpacker node. I want to start out fresh and clean. So I was like, right, well, I'll do this like the olden days. So I've started a Rails engine. This is what I'm building. And it's called Shoelace Rails UI. You can look it up today. It's an active development, so it's not a V1 or anything, but you can use it today. Shoelace-Rails-UI. And it does two critical things. The first is it makes it absolutely painless to get Shoelace in your new Rails app. If you go Rails new, you put my gem in. So if you go Rails new, include my gem, bundle install, and then just the command Rails G shoelace install. You're done. You have it. It's over. You've got shoelace. That's how it should be. You shouldn't have to be doing all of these other management things, asset packaging and all that. So I'll say for how I built it, the CSS comes with the gem. You don't need to touch it, right? Like it's all packaged away for you. And then the generator, all it does is all the crap that you normally need to do anyway. Like it adds it to the import map.rb. So that's how it pins that JavaScript. And then it imports shoelace in the application.js or whatever the file is that happens in. And it also requires the CSS and the application.css. So it's been tested only against brand new Rails apps. Like I can't say for migration today. But then, all right, the thing that I've done completely for myself, and I hope other people like it too, is a code gen. So once you have it, optionally, you can write shoelace the way I would like to, which means instead of writing pure just HTML, you can write SL. So you can go into ERB and write SL_alert. And then for every attribute that shoelace has, you can just write it like arguments. So you'd be like height, 25 picks, variant, warning. Like you can push all those in as arguments and nest it and do all of your stuff that you like in that format. But for me, writing things as like view helpers and ERB kind of signals something to a coder because it has all this highlights that's like, okay, you're doing something a bit magical here. And I feel like shoelace is a little magical. So if you prefer grokking and interacting with code in a Ruby-esque way, as opposed to just writing everything manually, like with your little pen in the tag, old school, which I know a lot of people do, and you can with my gem. You don't have to use my wrapper, but I've written this long regenerate.rb file, which takes the source of shoelace and goes through every component and reads it, and then it generates a Ruby helper method that if you write using that method, it compiles it back down to like what shoelace expects it to be from ERB. Right. So I think that's the real cool bit, but I think it's kind of like I'll get through the door of selling this gem to people of use shoelace as easily as possible just for Rails, which is just, but yeah. And then the second is, but also write it in a really cool way. Yeah, so I can tell you where I'm at with it as of date of recording. So whenever people hear this, it'll be a bit further along. I have used it and I have just written components and they just work. I've documented maybe one bug at the moment. I've got a GitHub Action CI with one smoke test. So just to confirm it generates anything. I've paired with some people internally at work. This is all OSS, so you can see it. It's not Shopify. I've paired with people at work for like refactoring some of my code gen to make it more robust, beautiful Ruby as opposed to, very simple Ruby. But the two, on top of like gem management, which is like improving linting and all that stuff, with building a Rails engine, I'd say like rendering the icons is still one big thing I have to get put together so the icons don't perform as I like. And I want to auto-gen a docs site. So my big complaint with Rails on Hotwire is if you go into the Hotwire, like if you go into hotwire.dev and you click for the turbo docs, how is it written? It's written, this is the exact same problem, by the way. It's written as turbo frame tag in HTML, right? So it's like, or turbo frame. So it's like pure HTML bracket, turbo -frame, whereas you and I would never write that. We write it in the ERB, turbo frame tag. So that was pretty cool. And I did run into, boy, I don't want to go into the next thing, but I did run into a couple blockers with it, but I don't want to like.
No, go for it. Nick, do you have any blockers?
Oh, I'm prompting. I'm sorry, dude. Please forgive me. Am I in trouble? Like, by the way, listeners, normally, if you've ever listened to me on a podcast, I'm normally not so selfish with just like going on crazy tirades. So Drew, I hope I'm not annoying you with my like long-winded rants here.
No, honestly, this is great. You keep going. Everyone's here to listen to you, not to me. So please talk more.
Maybe I should just do maybe I should just like take this recording and play it for my talk, and this will be the talk. Well, 30 minutes of content. So okay. So you asked me, what are my blockers? I have 2 with this and then 1 not with this. So yeah, a few things that I ran into is just like, hey, building a Rails engine isn't for everybody, or building a gem. if you Google problems and you think about the support you get on the internet as far as what's out there, Ruby, well, Rails has all the answers for the last 12, 14 years, like on Stack Overflow and whatever. Ruby's right up there with it for every way to do everything in the world. But Rails engines, we don't have millions of people building them. It's hard to debug stuff. And like I'd have very simple errors about things not loading because again, in Rails, we have auto loading. So you never worry about how you require crap or how you organize it. You're just like, yeah, it'll all auto load. And I literally lost hours. My poor wife, I was working on the sofa and I lost 5 hours to like figuring out how to do a require correctly. And if you ever want to feel like a fraud as a Rubyist, that's a great way. It's like, oh, I don't know how to load my freaking code and it's never going to load and I'm stupid. I've organized it all wrong. And also, yeah, so that was one blocker, but I got through it. There are docs and I found out how to auto load paths. And but you have to do it in a Rails engine way. You have to actually declare it in the engine inherited class. So, okay. And then, yeah, after that, what else? You're in raw Ruby land. So it's not like Rails where there's millions of conventions on app models, app controllers, concerns. You're just like, once you're in lib, yeehaw, do whatever you want. Just sling it all together. So like I have already run into like bits of structure where like it's shoelace Rails UI. So I have nested it as like shoelace Rails UI in the folders, even though there's no need to like have something just in shoelace, just in Rails, just in UI. So I'm half tempted to like bring all the folders up, but still namespace it as shoelace : : right? You see what I mean? Just really simple, but it's a bit of a blocker because like if you start out with a bad structure, it only gets more painful, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And trying to handle it. But yeah, so that's moving along. And I guess a third thing that I got blocked. So to give some credit to front end, I actually wrote some React recently, and I managed to make it well into my 30s without ever getting paid to write any React for anyone ever. And I've done a good job at it. In fact, I'm literally writing tooling to avoid it, right? It was hard. Like just doing something that, and I'm not dissing React. Like I've started to really appreciate all the tooling around it, all the like type safety and like autogen and editor power is so good. And like every time I goofed up, like VS Code was telling me all the thousands of things I did wrong, right? Like instantly. I didn't have to like refresh the page like in Rails. Oh, this isn't the thing. Oh, okay, I'll go back to the controller, right? But yeah, I think that, you know, I'd say for anyone in a similar position, definitely I needed to remember what it's like to be a total noob, like a complete noob. Right. Like as noob, like I don't even really know TypeScript, yo. Like I'm as a noob as it gets. Like I'm so low. I had so little information. And I guess the way I unblocked and I'd share with people is just, if you can, I have a resistance to pairing too. If you have anybody you can pair with, if somebody can sit down with 1 to 2 hours with you and you can just fling questions at them and not be afraid to sound stupid, be like, what's a hook? What is a hook? Why is it in that folder? What is this? And it's like, is that auto-generated? Is that a React thing? Or is that thing? Why am I importing this? You know, and that was really, really helpful. And I think going forward, I just want to shout out. So there's a few resources I'm going to take to improve my React, because I don't do it full time, but I do get close to it sometimes in life. And first for TypeScript, I'm going to start using, what do you call it? Do you know Gary Bernhardt?
No, I don't.
So Gary Bernhardt did the Destroy All Software screencast series in the last 10 years, which was very heavy Ruby. So shout out to that. It's not really mentioned a lot anymore, and did Deconstruct Conf for a few years. But Gary, that's how I had the like entry to Gary, and also did a very funny lightning talk called WAT that we can do in the show notes or something. But it has this great learning tool called executeprogram.com. And I used it years ago for leveling up my regex, because I could do it like anyone. But if I really tried to do anything interesting in regular expressions, like I didn't know what I was doing. I just was kind of like hacking at it. And it was 16 lessons. And the way it learns is like every time you do a lesson, you can't do the next one straight away. You have to wait and come back. And before you can unlock that one, you have to revisit what you've learned. And it goes in double. So you'll review lesson one day after, 2 days after, 4 days after, 8 days after, and 16 days after you've learned it. And that'll stack with every other lesson. So you're constantly refreshing. So concepts from that have stayed in my head for quite a while, but he now has like 3 or 4 TypeScript courses. So I think I'm going to be using that to prevent future blockers. And I definitely suggest the course to anyone. It was not a waste of money when I was using it. But yeah, anyway, so long and short of it is building a gem that I think everybody should go. It's not even beta, but if you want to go drop it into your Rails app and find all the bugs, like I'm really excited about like starting to promote it.
Yeah, that's super cool. And like I always enjoy seeing when someone builds a gem or a library there where they're like, I needed this for something and I scratched my itch and I opened it up for everyone else to use. Like that, those end up being the best tools. Those end up being the most fun to work on, to work with. So I'm excited to play with it. As soon as we're done with this, I took the day off from work because I just needed a mental health day. So I'm going to go play with it.
Nice. Kudos to you, by the way, for normalizing talking about that. I have been in a lot of places, and now I come to Shopify, people talk about taking a mental health day. And it's nice to like, so other people know that that's, you know, because I hear about people taking months off for stress out here. They don't get mental health days, but then they'll be like, oh, I'm off with stress for 6 months because they never got to take a mental health day before, right? So like it's nice to be able to prioritize that. But one other thing I'll say sorry, I'm going all over the place here today. You got me all excited there, Drew.
No, it's good. When I had Andrew Mason on, we were both all over the place because like both of our ADHDs were just raging. We recorded late enough that my meds had basically worn off and his were getting to the tail end. So we were definitely all over the place. It was a very fun episode to record though. So feel free to bounce all over the place and wherever you want to go.
Oh, thanks. Okay, well, if I do one more bounce, there's something interesting with this gem that I think I might want to share. So we also integrate with form 4, form tag, and form width. So that means if you do like a text field or like radio boxes or any of that stuff, a submit button, it just comes with the form now because all these components are integrated into it, but you write it out, right? Like you write SL_form4. Like we don't hijack form 4 completely, but I didn't do this. Yuki, who is a Ruby core maintainer, has a repo called Shoelace Rails. That's why I didn't call mine Shoelace Rails, but it was still like Yarn Webpacker. But the key thing it did was the form 4, form tag, and form width. So what I did is, we're all MIT licensed code here. Everyone can be influenced by anyone. I just took the relevant Ruby file that did that conversion. I did a big fat attribution and license atop it and brought it into my gem, which is also licensed MIT and all that stuff. So basically, and I even do it in the README. I'm like, Yuki built this awesome way to make it work the same way as I do with components with the forms. So yeah, big shout out to Yuki for solving what would have been the hardest technical problem. And I just copy pasted it. So it does work with form 4 and form width and form tag. So yeah, this is the first announcement. I've not said about this gem publicly anywhere, but I knew coming on Drew's program that this is the place to make your big announcements to the world if you're building something to get it out there. So this is the first I've said about it.
You heard it here. Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Like hopefully we'll have a few listeners by the time this goes live. This is episode 3. So
you better host it on like the biggest AWS infrastructure because it's just going to fall over with all the streaming. So
oh boy, now you're making me nervous. The only way I can get through these recordings is thinking, yeah, there's going to be like 3 people listening to this, and they're not even listening to me. They're listening to you. But so actually, since we are coming close to time, I know you're wrapping up your day over in Ireland. Like you've talked a ton about some really cool stuff. So the last question is going to be kind of hard to answer, but is there anything that you haven't talked about yet that you've recently learned or experienced or seen or anything? Just a cool, hey, I bought a new surfboard is also a perfectly acceptable answer to that one.
Oh my God. So it doesn't have to be completely coding related. I've got something.
No.
I've got real thing.
Go for it. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll keep it under 5 minutes. So I read an amazing article, and I think this really applies to programmers. Maybe because you're saying about ADHD, there might be an interest there too, just anybody. But in programming, this is literally in the last day I've learned of this. We all have this itch to kind of do things. And it's not just coding, right? You hear about people who are coders who like to play their guitar, or like who like to paint figurines or something, who like to do crafty things, like as a part of their life fulfilling. Not everybody does. Some people are just like, I'll code all the time. But I've noticed that a lot of our interests kind of go down into just a few things. Like, yeah, I like to whittle a tiny bit, but that's not very unique. A lot of people do that. I like to do a bit of Arduino. A lot of people like to do Arduino. So there's this huge supply of talent for like non-money making things that I don't want to say we're not optimal, but we just fling it everywhere. And I've read about a need, and I think this would be really cool for people to research into this. So there is a Heritage Crafts Association. It might be a bit more UK focused, but I think it has global reach just because the UK is such an old country, that monitors crafts and classifies them much like species in extinct, critically endangered, or threatened. And I'm talking hundreds of crafts, literally documented down to like number of professionals, number of serious amateurs, number of hobbyists doing these things. And there's about 5 that are extinct. There's about 80 that are critically endangered, as in maybe like 2 or less people making money full time off this. But there are things that could be as old as like a Roman craft that came here. Like the one that I'm really interested in that only has 2 professionals in the UK is parchment making. That's been done. If you write something in parchment from the year 400, it'd still be readable today. Paper's 200 years max, right? Barometer making, like all sorts of stuff. But and there's even grants available for people who want to teach someone if you already know, to learn it if you don't know, buy equipment if you want. But what I'm trying to say here is if you're listening, and I'll just confirm, or if we do show notes, I don't know if we'll have a way for that.
Yeah, I'll put any kind of links that you want in show notes afterwards. So
yeah, so if you're itching for a craft and you're like, oh, should I write a book, or should I get into coffee roasting? No, nothing against coffee roasting or beer making. There is a need for hobbyists to keep crafts alive, and it's actually incredibly well documented. And you could literally go down, read through this website, pick something that's interesting, and DM a guy or email. And you could, even if he's in the UK and you're here, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be somebody you're on site. If you're in the UK, it might be even easier. But this has really triggered an excitement in my brain that's been there for days. And it's like, when I start to do something, I think instead of just like, I do play guitar. If you're on my Zoom, you can see it in the background. But like, if I'm filling in my bandwidth with a new, like, I want to be satisfied in doing something in life, and I'm going to be sitting around anyway, like people who buy tools to like do woodworking, like if you're willing to do that level of a craft, oh my gosh, how satisfying would it be to help keep an ancient, like hundreds or thousands of years old craft that can only be taught person to person alive. So that is a thing that I've learned that has massively been a paradigm shift in my brain in the last 72 hours. So there you go.
That is awesome. I'm looking forward to that link, because not only is that going in the show notes, but I am then going to waste hours.
Yeah, you should. You know what you should do? Barometer making is now like illegal this side of the pond because you can't purchase or move mercury. But I'm pretty sure in America, it's not illegal to have mercury. So like, you should. Yeah, people should do. So we can't save it in the UK. So barometer making, it's glass blowing, woodworking, and a bit of mercury. So there you go.
All right. Yeah, I'll add it to my list of hobbies. So I've got ice hockey, board games, and barometer making. That's a good one. I like it.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nick, for coming on the show. I really appreciated you coming on and going over everything with us. I'm super excited for your Sin City Ruby talk. And everyone, check the show notes so that you can follow Nick online and see all the cool stuff he does with Ruby Archaeology.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for having me on, and have a great day.